Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova. During this season, our tradition teaches us to think about what we have done wrong, to say sorry when we have made a mistake, and to forgive people who ask for forgiveness. But do you think that we can learn from our mistakes without forgiving ourselves? I want to tell you the story of Jake and Ruth. Jake and Ruth were neighbors and inseparable friends. They did everything together. They rode bikes together. They had play dates together. Their families even celebrated all the holidays together. And the thing that they loved to do more than anything else was bake. They baked pies. They baked cakes. They even watched those baking competition reality TV shows together. And they loved baking challah. Every Friday afternoon, they would make a challah together. Some chalot they did together, like their plain challah or their round honey-drizzled challah. But they also had their own specialty challahs. Jake's special challah included chocolate chips. And Ruth made a killer pretzel challah. One year, a few months before the holidays, or as they call them, the holidays, the local deli called up Ruth and invited her to make some sample pretzel chalot. If their bakers liked them, they wanted Ruth to make pretzel chalot to sell at the deli. This was a huge opportunity. Excited and determined, she began dedicating all of her time to perfecting her pretzel challah. And Jake, well, he seemed to get a little left behind. He felt a bit overshadowed and wished for his own chance to shine. And it got in the way of their friendship. The more Ruth focused on her pretzel challah, the less they baked together. Instead of making their chalot together, they only did their own recipes. Jake and Ruth grew further and further apart, and Ruth was starting to get frustrated that Jake didn't seem interested in celebrating this amazing opportunity. Instead, he seemed to resent Ruth for even being asked to try out her challah. Soon they started having small disagreements, and then they started having big disagreements. They tried baking together, but the growing tension between them made it very difficult. The pies had too much dough, the cakes collapsed, and their challahs seemed to lack the taste of sweetness and love that they used to have. Instead of having fun baking together, they started to loathe even sharing the same kitchen space. Well, the day of the tryout came. Ruth baked what she thought were 3 perfect pretzel chalot. The color was right, the shape was right, each grain of salt was placed just so. She brought them into the deli. The owners and chefs took a few bites, and their eyes lit up. "Wow," they said. "This is incredible. We would love to showcase your chalot this year." Ruth felt conflicted. On one hand, she was proud to have her challah accepted by a real deli. But on the other hand, it was a bittersweet moment because she wished that she could have shared it with Jake. When she told Jake the news, he pretended to be happy for Ruth, but inside he felt jealous and frustrated. The next time they tried baking together, he intentionally flipped the entire flour container over, spilling pounds of flour onto the floor. Ruth was devastated. This felt like more than just a physical mess to clean up. Jake's reaction had gotten to a point of hurting his best friend. As Ruth's tears started to hydrate the flour, Jake realized the extent of his actions and how his jealousy had led him to cause his friend pain. Jake and Ruth decided to take a few days to cool down. When Friday rolled around again, Ruth confronted Jake about her feelings. She expressed her hurt and disappointment, not only for the flour mess Jake had made, but that his jealousy had caused them to grow apart. Jake knew he had made many mistakes, and he immediately apologized sincerely and admitted that he regretted his actions. They decided to take a break from baking their own challahs and work together to create their sweet round challah. And it was just like old times. They laughed, they worked together as a team, and they even talked about what happened last week on their baking show and laughed about how silly the term soggy bottoms sounds. While the challah was in the oven, they had another open, heartfelt conversation. They both acknowledged their biggest mistake was not being aware of how their successes and failures could be driven by their own desires and insecurities. Jake admitted he was envious of Ruth's opportunity and let his feelings cloud his judgment. Ruth shared that she had been so focused on perfecting the pretzel challah recipe that she didn't even notice how Jake was feeling. Ruth and Jake talked about how their friendship meant more to them than any individual achievement. And Ruth invited Jake to help her make her pretzel challah. Jake was so excited to help Ruth achieve this dream and celebrate her accomplishment. And as they worked on making the hundreds of pretzel challah for the deli, they also talked about how they felt some guilt and shame for how they acted towards one another. As they made the next batch, they watched as the ingredients swirled together to create a cohesive dough. And they realized that in addition to forgiving each other, they started to forgive themselves. They realized that being human means making mistakes. And it's okay to have flaws. They talked about how their mistakes were an essential part of their growth as individuals and as friends. Just like how their mistakes from baking would make each successive batch even better. That Friday, they made an extra pretzel challah, but this one they kept for themselves. This one seemed to encapsulate the reconciliation and forgiveness the two friends had discussed. This loaf of bread became a representation not only of their friendship's journey, but of the powerful, transformative power of forgiveness. They allowed their friendship to evolve to a deeper level, one that can weather challenges with grace and empathy. After they said motzi as a family, Ruth's mom took a first bite and had a confused look on her face. "What's wrong?" Jake asked. "This is what you're making for the deli?" "Yes. Why?" Ruth asked. "It's delicious," Ruth's mom continued, "but it tastes different. What changed?" Ruth and Jake responded together with big smiles on their faces. "We did." I'm going to invite you to turn to those around you and think about this story and these questions. And as they come up, I want to acknowledge that 99 times out of 100, we ask you to talk about these questions, and instead of talking about these questions, maybe you're talking about what you're doing for lunch and everything after. But let's make a compact, our own breets right now, that for this service and Yom Kippur family morning service, you'll try these questions. So, do you think it's possible to learn from our mistakes without forgiving ourselves for them? Have you ever experienced personal growth as a result of forgiving someone or yourself? And what can happen when we hold on to resentment and refuse to forgive ourselves? And lastly, what are some ways in which a supportive community can open up possibilities for individuals and their dreams? So let's take a moment to talk with those around us. I hope if only for like 5 seconds of that time, we actually talked about the questions. And I want to encourage each of us to continue reflecting on this question, can we learn from our mistakes without forgiving ourselves? If there's only one question that sits with you over these next 10 days, I hope it's that one. One of my teachers, Dr. Lisa Braun-Glaser, teaches, if we are created B'Tselem Elohim, in the divine image, then if we don't take care of ourselves, it follows that we are damaging something divine. If we can forgive others, we can also forgive ourselves. We can accept ourselves as we are, with all of our human foibles and faults. Rather than avoiding who we are, accepting ourselves helps us face our fears of not being good enough and gives us strength to try to be better. As we awaken to community and our possibilities, may we learn in this year ahead to forgive others as well as ourselves. L'shana tova tikatevu.